The Renaissance created an era of exploration, both physically exploring the world and in terms of technology and science. But why? What led to the Renaissance? And what impact did it have on the cultures of Europe and even the world outside Europe's borders? That's what I want to explore today in another episode of Eras Defined from Just-in-Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. This video has been available to members of my channel for some time now. So if you like what I do here and you want early access to my videos, get yourself a Wood membership to my channel for €7 a month, and you too will get immediate access to my videos as I upload them. Okay, enough of that. Let's get cracking. The Renaissance, which in French means rebirth, spanned from the 14th to the 17th century. It started in Italy, specifically in the wealthy, independent city-states like Florence and Venice. It later spread across Europe, altering the fabric of the continent. The Renaissance represented a bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern era, a time of great social, economic, and especially cultural change. The importance of the Renaissance can't be overstated. This period saw a renewed interest in the classical knowledge of Greece and Rome. People began to embrace humanism, prioritizing human potential and achievement and rationality over the strictly religious dogma of the Middle Ages. This cultural revival led to revolutionary advancements in art, science, politics, and education. It was during this period we saw the emergence of legendary polymaths like Leonardo da Vinci and the writings of influential figures like Machiavelli. In fantasy literature, the Renaissance often serves as a backdrop for stories of intrigue, artistry, and sweeping societal change. Scott Lynch's The Lies of Locke Lamora, part of the Gentleman Bastard series, draws inspiration from the Renaissance era Italy, with its city-state settings, complex politics, and blend of crime and high culture. Guy Gabriel Kay's Tigana and The Lions of Al-Rassan also echo themes and settings from this period, touching on art, religious conflict, and the tension between old and new ways of thinking. But if we were to peel back the layers of history and explore the factors that ushered in the Renaissance, we would find that there is no single event that kick-started this rebirth. It was a series of events and conditions that laid the groundwork for this cultural revolution. And in your world, that is also important to consider. How would a Renaissance come about? So let's take a look at what happened in our world. The end of the Middle Ages, marked by the 100 Years' War, saw a decline in feudalism, the social structure that had dominated Europe for centuries. The feudal system was characterized by a rigid hierarchy, with the church and the nobility at the top and the peasants at the bottom. Feudalism is basically like a pyramid scheme in societal control. And I did do a short on what exactly it is, which you can check out in the information card. As the system started to crumble, power structures began to shift, paving the way for a more balanced society, one where individuals could rise through the ranks based on merit rather than birthright alone. But why did the feudal society crumble? Well, in the 14th century, the Black Plague swept across Europe, and it was a cataclysmic event that reduced the population by as much as 60%. While devastating, the plague unexpectedly brought about some societal changes that set the stage for the Renaissance. With fewer workers available, labor became a valuable commodity, and this allowed common people to demand better wages and conditions. This shift in power dynamics disrupted the old feudal system and led to increased social mobility. As the Middle Ages faded, we saw the growth of cities and an increase in trade. The wealthy Italian city-states like Florence and Venice became hubs of commerce and culture, attracting artists, scholars, and merchants. With wealth flowing into these urban centers, a new class of influential merchants and bankers emerged, individuals who would become pivotal patrons of the arts during the Renaissance. These merchants were basically richer than the nobles as well, and money talks. So they had more influence than the nobles because of their wealth. And lastly, an essential component of the Renaissance was the increased literacy among the population. And this was fueled in part by the pivotal invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century. Many pieces of technology are called revolutionary. The printing press really, really was. This piece of technology made books, previously a luxury reserved for the wealthy and the clergy, more affordable and accessible. Knowledge, particularly classical text, spread at an unprecedented rate, igniting a thirst for learning and fueling the humanist movement that was at the heart of the Renaissance. I cannot overemphasize how much the printing press changed everything. The written word being freely available to everyone to read changes so much in your society. And that is why I have quite a few videos on exactly that topic, which you can check out in the specially created playlist in the information card. The upheavals and changes of this transitional era were not easy, and they weren't swift, but they created the fertile ground from which the Renaissance could bloom. And it's important when thinking of your own world building to consider the transitional periods, the seismic shifts in society. How did they come about? What did they change? And what did they leave intact during these transition periods? Or equally important to the events leading to the Renaissance are the players in this transition period. And that's what we'll talk about next. So if you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, consider giving the video a super thanks, and let's talk about the most influential of families during this Renaissance, the Medici. Originating from the Tuscan countryside, the Medicis rose to prominence in Florence in the 14th century. The family's ascent to power started with Giovanni de' Medici, who established the Medici Bank. Recognized as the most prosperous bank in Europe during the 15th century, this financial enterprise allowed the Medici to amass immense wealth. Yet, their ambitions went far beyond finance. Over generations, the Medicis leveraged their economic power to gain political influence, and even had family members appointed as popes and married into European royal families. The Medicis were not just shrewd politicians and bankers, they were also lovers of art, literature, and sciences, which brings us to one of their most lasting legacies, their role as patrons. But what exactly is patronage in this time period? In the context of the Renaissance, patronage was more than just financial aid. It wasn't just tossing a couple of bucks at an artist. It was a powerful relationship between patrons and artists, writers, and scholars they supported. Wealthy families like the Medici didn't just pay the bills of artists. They played an active role in encouraging and shaping the cultural landscape of their time. This system enabled creative minds to flourish without the everyday worry of financial survival. But patrons gained prestige and had their ideals, visions, and narratives immortalized. The Medici family took patronage to extraordinary heights. Their support for the arts wasn't just about accumulating beautiful objects or enhancing their social standing. Rather, they were mindful of the types of work they commissioned, the themes that were explored, and the artists they chose to support. They had a specific vision of what art should be, informed by their interest in humanism and the classical past, and they used their patronage to bring this vision to life. For example, consider their patronage of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Botticelli. The Medicis didn't just fund these artists, they guided their careers, they introduced them to classical ideals, they arranged for them to study the human form, setting them to work on projects that reflected the family's worldview. And in doing so, the Medicis played a significant role in defining the artistic direction of the Renaissance. Michelangelo, for example, lived in their house. He ate with the family. He was literally a daily part of their lives. It wasn't just a commercial transaction. In the realm of academia, the Medicis founded the Platonic Academy, a gathering place for intellectuals and scholars where the philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome were studied and discussed. This was not merely an exercise in nostalgia, but a conscious effort to reinvigorate the intellectual life of Florence. They brought the leading thinkers of the age to their city, creating a hub of intellectual discussion and fostering an environment where new ideas and innovation could flourish. In these ways, the Medici were not just spectators, but were drivers of the Renaissance, guiding it through their selective patronage. Their vision and influence have left an indelible mark on our collective cultural heritage, shaping the way we understand and appreciate arts to this day. That kind of patronage can have a fundamental effect in fantasy worlds as well. And if we look at fantasy literature, we see echoes of the patronage system in some of the fantasy worlds. Notable authors have utilized this concept to enrich their world building and character relationships. If you look at the Lannisters from George R.R. Martin's world, A Song of Ice and Fire, you can see that they support certain minstrels, mummers, and other performers, as well as sponsoring tournaments in order to ensure that their narrative is the one on people's lips. Their narrative is what the common people believe. They sell their point of view by using the performers, the artists of their day. In Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles, we see patronage from the other side, where the protagonist, Corfe, is supported by noble patrons who fund his education and bardic performances. And this mirrors the relationship between artists and patrons in the Renaissance. Here we can see the point of view from the artist side who is being supported, and we can see the impact that the patrons have on the artist. And if you've been following this channel for a while now, you know how much I love art influencing stories. And in my first book of Sangwheel Chronicles, The Hidden Blade, Louis, my assassin character, uses the entertainment guilds in the city of Somfa to turn the population against the local baron by writing plays and stories that subtly remind the people of the laws that the baron is kind of flirting with breaking. And if that sounds interesting to you, links to my books are down below and you can pick them up and support the channel in that way. I really do think that all world builders should consider the role of patronage in their society. It could be a noble family sponsoring a troupe of bards, a wealthy merchant funding the construction of grand temples, or even a powerful sorcerer investing in an apprentice's magical education. Patronage can serve as a crucial world-building element, influencing not just the aesthetics of your world, but also the power dynamics, societal structures, and the stories of individual characters. And if you enjoyed that discussion of patronage and its impact on the Renaissance, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about old ideas versus new ideas and the conflict that this evokes. As the Middle Ages receded and the Renaissance dawned, one of the most transformative shifts was the return to classical ideas, a revival of Roman and Greek philosophies, arts, and sciences. But why was this so significant? And how did it shape the Renaissance? Ancient Greece and Rome were seen as a golden age of intellectual and artistic accomplishments, a pinnacle of human potential that had been lost during the Middle Ages. This was understandable in the context of the fall of Rome and the Dark Ages and everything that had been lost during this period. Rediscovering the works, ideas, and aesthetic values of this classical world led to a surge of inspiration and innovation across Europe. These ancient ideas helped shape what is now referred to as the Renaissance mindset. This mindset was characterized by a shift from religious and otherworldly concerns toward a more human-centered view of the world, a movement known as humanism. Humans, their emotions, their potential, and their place in the natural world were now at the center of philosophical and artistic inquiry. The influence on art was profound. Artists began focusing on accurately portraying the human form and expressing human emotion, drawing on classical techniques. You just need to look at the works of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and their incredible attention to anatomical detail to see this new interest in human physicality and sensuality. Literature, too, was transformed, with the epic poetry of Homer and the dramas of Sophocles offering new models for narrative and dramatic structure. Writers began to explore complex human motivations and moral questions, moving away from the religious allegories that dominated medieval literature. However, this revival was not without conflict. The new humanistic and secular ideas often clashed with traditional religious values and the authority of the church, and this led to societal and cultural tension. The old ways were not readily abandoned, and in many circles, the embrace of classical ideas was seen as heretical. Indeed, the shift towards humanism and the resurgence of classical ideals was seen by many as a threat to the entrenched norms of the medieval society. It was a time of significant change and disruption, and with such upheaval came conflict and resistance. Take, for instance, the case of Galileo Galilei. This brilliant scientist was a key figure in the scientific revolution, which was itself a product of the Renaissance's return to classical ideas. Galileo's discoveries, particularly his support for the heliocentric model of the universe, that is to say, the sun, not the earth, is at the center, the sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. This point of view directly challenged the geocentric worldview endorsed by the church, which is to say, the earth is the center of the universe. Galileo's ideas were deemed heretical, and he was eventually put on trial by the Inquisition, which no one expects, and forced to recant. Another example can be seen in the philosophical realm. The ideas of Niccolo Machiavelli, expressed in his political treatise, The Prince, caused great controversy. His advocacy for realpolitik, which is a pragmatic, even ruthless form of statecraft, as opposed to the idealized values of the church for morality and ethics, provoked outrage, and his works were eventually banned by the church. Art, too, was not immune from this tension. While Renaissance artists pursued more realistic and human-focused depictions, these new techniques could sometimes push against the religious conventions. For example, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper caused a stir due to its deviation from traditional depictions, portraying the apostles with discernible human emotions and expressions, which broke from the static and divine depictions of the Middle Ages. These conflicts, while sometimes painful and tumultuous, were in many ways the engine of the Renaissance, driving forward change and innovation. They reflected a society in flux, grappling with the integration of old and new ideas, a struggle that would define this fascinating period in history. Fantasy literature often reflects this tension, weaving it into their narratives. An excellent example of this is the novel Tegana by Guy Gavriel Kay. This novel, while set in a completely fictional world, echoes the conflicts and tensions of the Renaissance period. Its characters grapple with the effect of an oppressive rule that seeks to erase history and culture, just as the Renaissance thinkers and artists grappled with societal norms and the status quo in their quest to revive classical ideals. The struggle of the characters in Tegana reflect the broader human struggle for knowledge, freedom, and self-expression that was at the heart of the Renaissance. Of course, some of the new elements that were being explored during the Renaissance was that of science and technology. Another area where we experienced a seismic shift. So let's turn our attention to that part of the Renaissance now. Starting with the realm of science, the Renaissance was a period of enormous advancement, with key figures changing the way we perceive and interact with the world. The aptly named scientific revolution saw the emergence of the scientific method, where empirical evidence was used to test theories, moving us away from the medieval approach where religious doctrine was often used to explain natural phenomena. One such revolutionary figure was Nicolaus Copernicus, a Polish astronomer who proposed the heliocentric model of the universe, positioning the sun, not the earth, at the center. His theories, though controversial, laid the groundwork for future astronomers, specifically Galileo Galilei, and set the stage for a radical rethinking of the concepts. Galileo Galilei used the telescope, and this led to his discovery of the moons around Jupiter and the phases of Venus, which further challenged that geocentric worldview that Copernicus first upended. Galileo's developments in the field of physics laid the groundwork for Newton's laws of motion. And so you can see how one builds on the other: Copernicus, Galileo, Newton. And eventually, in our day and age, Einstein. But before Newton and Einstein and so on, there was Johannes Kepler, who also played a crucial role in the scientific upheaval. His laws of planetary motion, which provided mathematical support for the heliocentric model, were an essential stepping stone to the development of physics and astronomy. And if we turn our attention from physics to technology, I'm going to return to that printing press. I know, I keep beating this drum. But the printing press really was a everything changes here technology. I know that people overuse the term revolutionary technology. The printing press was one of those that really was revolutionary. It was developed by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440, and it facilitated the dissemination of knowledge by making books more accessible and affordable. The printing press democratized information and enabled ideas to spread more widely and faster. And you know that ideas need other ideas to breed more ideas. They don't do well in a vacuum. So that printing press really changed a lot. Then in navigation, there was also dramatic improvements as well as in ship design. And the astrolabe, the compass, and all of this contributed to what is now called the Age of Exploration. There were figures like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and so on, who went out on ships and discovered new lands and sea routes. And this, of course, had a profound impact on trade and on global power dynamics. The impact of these scientific and technological advancements cannot be overstated. They transformed society and laid the foundation for the modern world. And I'll be talking much more about that kind of exploration in a dedicated video on the Age of Sail. But the Age of Exploration actually did precede the Age of Sail, and it was essentially when people were sailing out of Europe and discovering new lands. Now, I do say discovering in air quotes because obviously those lands had people living on it already. So it's discovery only from the European perspective. And unfortunately, for the people living in those lands, it often was not a great experience to be discovered by Europe. For all the changing morals of the Renaissance, there wasn't yet anything like human rights. And many of the European explorers did terrible, terrible things to the people that they found in these new continents. But the period of exploration led to the first wave of globalization, a concept which has shaped our world to this day. The Age of Exploration can also serve as a rich source of inspiration for fantasy writers, providing a framework for world building and narrative development. Take, for example, the Téméraire series by Naomi Novik, which reimagines the Napoleonic Wars with an air force of dragons. While not strictly mirroring the Age of Exploration, it borrows from those themes of discovery, cultural interaction, and the tensions caused by disruptive new technologies. So we can see the Renaissance and the accompanying scientific revolution and the Age of Exploration provide a rich soil from which fantasy authors can draw. And if you enjoyed that discussion of science and exploration and the Renaissance, hit that thumbs up button and let's talk about magic that fits a Renaissance era world. So, an ideal form of magic in this kind of world would, of course, be magic as a science, which echoes the empirical curiosity of the Renaissance period. In this system, spells would work much like scientific experiments, with magical practitioners studying laws and theorems and meticulously crafting their incantations to achieve the desired effect. The focus here is on precision, on understanding the natural laws governing magic, and on a systematic approach to magical education. A brilliant illustration of this can be found in Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles. In his world, the university is a central institution where magic is taught as a rigorous discipline, with different branches of magic drawing on principles akin to chemistry, physics, and even music theory. So you could build your magic system where it has those kinds of laws and is explored in a scientific manner. Secondly, magic could be intertwined with art. Just as the Renaissance was a period of artistic flourishing, magic in this system could be a form of ultimate expression, channeled through painting, sculpture, music, or literature. Magical potency in this case would be linked to creativity, inspiration, and technical skill. I did do a video on music as a magic system, which you can check out in the information card. Thirdly, in line with the Age of Exploration, you could maybe envision a magic system that involves discovery and control of new, exotic forms of magic from distant lands. So in this case, your explorers from the culture experiencing the Renaissance could travel across the ocean and find magic in strange and new lands, and that could lead to conflict both with those cultures that control the magic and when they return to their home continent, with the impact that magic would have on their Renaissance society. And lastly, you should consider the religious tension of this period. So I could conceptualize a system where magic and religion is closely intertwined. Here, magic could be seen as a divine gift, and people could practice magic within the church. But maybe that's not real. Maybe this is a holdover from the Middle Ages of your world, where the church controlled all magic by taking magical practitioners into the fold of the priesthood. And now, in this Renaissance, people are breaking free of that church control and are practicing magic without the blessing of the church, and this is seen as heresy. And this would create a very direct central conflict between the mages on the one hand and the church on the other hand that still seeks to control magic, and how common people would react to these mages. Like, what if you do have rogue mages that are evil? How would the other mages deal with this? And how would they deal with the church then pointing at that saying, see, look, you can't trust the mages? And if you implemented such a system where there is this conflict between religion and the mages as they enter this Renaissance period, I think that would give you a lot of thematic elements to play with that could very well mirror the events of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a transformative time in history. It was a rebirth of culture, thought, and creativity that shook off the rigid confines of the Middle Ages and sparked a profound evolution in human understanding. From the arts to sciences to philosophies, this was a period that celebrated human potential and fundamentally changed the way we saw ourselves and our place in the world. These concepts are a fertile ground for fantasy world building. And if you are going to draw from the Renaissance, I think there are some key points that you should bear in mind when you are creating this world. 1. Incorporate patronage systems. Much of the arts, science, and philosophy from the Renaissance was made possible due to the support of wealthy patrons. And your world should probably include both patrons and people who are patronized, and that system of patronage. Then, blend science and magic. The Renaissance was a period of great scientific discovery and exploration. So consider incorporating your magic system into that world. Consider making it all part and parcel of the same kind of exploration and experimentation. Don't forget conflict of ideals. The Renaissance was a time of huge change, and we know that with change comes conflict. So you will have conflict in such a world where the old ways of thought clash with the new ways of thought, and you have this tension probably between a religious and a more secular society. And those are my thoughts on using the Renaissance as an inspiration for fantasy world building. And if you want to say thanks for this video, there is a super thanks and membership, or you can buy my books. And there are currently signed book options in my Ko-fi store if you are in the United States and Canada. So check those out on the links down below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out my video on making craft guilds in fantasy worlds. And I will see you soon for another one.